The Ticking Blackbird by Robert Scott-Norton. Narrated by Paul Cram. Sooty held something shiny in her mouth and made that strange growling noise smug cats make once they've brought you a present. After a bit of coaxing, some chasing, and a fresh tin of cat food, she spat out her prize. A brass cog, no larger than a 10-pence piece. I held it to the window, and the evening sun caught the edges and it blazed. Sooty purred as I scooped her up and set her down on the table. I held the cog to her nose, and she licked the surface, then tried to bite it. "What have you found, puss?" She looked at me and meowed before heading back through the cat flap to the garden. Seconds later, she strutted back inside, her mouth clamped around a black something. It was only when she dropped the bird onto the tiles that I noticed the missing head. An assortment of cogs, wheels, and screws spilt from the neck. Sooty sat and stared at me. I awoke in the night, blood pounding in my head. Bolting upright, I grasped the duvet, and as the cold air brushed my sweat-soaked back, I broke out in goosebumps. Someone had been in the room. I blinked at the alarm clock until the numbers came into focus. 3:14. My arm itched like crazy. I scratched it absent-mindedly, and as I dropped my head into the pillow, I remembered the dream. It had been about the blackbird and Sooty and the sound of ticking. Over breakfast, I considered the bird. It lay across the table from me on some newspaper where I'd left it last night. A quick search on the internet confirmed it was a blackbird. Or rather, it looked like a blackbird. Maybe I should have got rid of it yesterday when she'd brought it in, but I couldn't bring myself to throw away this miniature work of art. I left the house 5 minutes late, fuming at myself for getting distracted. My unbuttoned jacket flapped at my sides like a pair of deformed wings as I half walked, half ran to the station. My efforts were wasted, though, as I helplessly watched my train pull out of the station as I ran onto the platform, sweaty and flustered. This was the third time I'd missed my train to work in over 2 years. Usually, I walk onto the platform at 7:25 like clockwork. Sarah would be livid. Yesterday, she'd bawled at Frank for being 20 minutes late returning from a doctor's appointment. Being late meant you were being watched. Late more than twice and you lost your month's commission. Shit. Only one thing for it. I got lucky and reached Sarah's assistant. "Hi, Sue?" I coughed. "It's Mark Frost." "Hi, Mark." Sue had the good nature to act surprised when I told her I was too sick to come into the office. Then, after a couple of lies about me not wanting to let the team down, we said our goodbyes. And I tossed the phone onto the sofa. A growling from the hallway, and then Sooty sauntered into the room. She spat another bird onto the carpet, this one intact. For a moment, I was speechless. But the thought of a dead bird on my beige carpet helped me find my voice. "For God's sake, Sooty, take it out. Go on, get it out of here." But Sooty didn't flinch, guarding her prey with guttural growls whenever I approached. This time, only a fresh piece of ham would tempt her away. I recognized from my earlier research the brown plumage of the female blackbird. With paper towels held in my hand like a makeshift glove, I reached for the bird. It twitched. "Oh, shit!" I stepped back. A wing tried to flap, but the feathers looked ruffled, probably where Sooty had held it in her jaws. It gave up moving its wing and blinked at me. Carefully, I lifted the injured bird and carried it into the kitchen. It was surprisingly warm in my hand, even through the paper towels. There wasn't any space on the work surface, thanks to dirty plates and pans, so I placed her on the kitchen table next to the other one. As if a final spark of life were coursing through her tiny body, the injured female reacted to being placed on the table and called, "Pink, pink, pink." It was crueler to let them suffer. I picked up the latest bird, pink, pink, and placed my hands around its neck. The soft feathers played against my fingertips like a cloud. How do you even do this? How much pressure before the next bone snap? I tightened my grip. "I'm sorry." Pink. The dead bird jumped to its feet. I yelped and dropped the female back onto the table. The headless male, and I know how crazy that sounds, took a few clumsy bounces towards his compatriot, turning his neck as if looking for her. The mechanics in his neck spun left and right, and as he searched, there was a low grinding noise, metal on metal. The female got right alongside the headless bird, who bowed, then waited patiently while she pecked around in his open neck. It stuck its bill into the whirring opening and tussled with something. Seconds later, she withdrew a small cog and placed it on the table. She went back into the neck, working with quick, deliberate movements. A minute passed, and then she retrieved the cog she'd previously removed and slotted it back inside her companion. The headless bird moved again, the grinding noise and clumsy gait gone. Sooty entered and paused when she saw her prey moving around on the table, apparently alive and well. Both birds turned around to face her. Pink, pink, plink, plink. This second call from the headless bird sounded wrong, but impressive considering it didn't have a head. The birds faced me. Then together they took flight and fled the kitchen towards the stairs. With their injuries, their flight was erratic, like bumblebees. They turned the corner and were out of sight. I'm usually an easy sleeper. When my head touches the pillow, I'm out like a light. But after a day of hunting through the house for the missing birds, I wasn't in the mood to sleep. I watched the ceiling as car lights from the road rippled patterns across the room. I'd read that one of the best ways to go to sleep when insomnia struck was to try not to sleep. Keeping your eyes open whilst your body is telling you it's bedtime takes a fair bit of concentration. And it's that concentration that eventually tires you out enough to nod off. Don't believe everything you read. At some point, though, I must have passed out, for I had the strangest dream about falling inside a giant grandfather clock. The pendulum would swing side to side and knock me around the case, a case without a bottom. I kept banging from one side to the other as I fell. All the while, the giant mechanism of the clock drove its ticking through my head. I put my hands to my ears, but still the noise broke through. And then something pecked my hand and woke me up. Tiny bounces traveled along the bed, settling by my feet. I sat up, switched the bedside light on, and blinked. Where my head had been on the pillow, a tiny streak of red, and there at the end of the bed stood the female blackbird, staring at me with glassy eyes. I touched my fingers to the side of my head. They came away wet with blood. "Get out of it!" I shouted at the bird, and it scared into the air. Pink, pink, pink. It flapped around me before leaving the room, less erratic than yesterday. In the bathroom, I angled my head to check my ear in the shaving mirror. A steady trickle of blood dribbled from my ear hole. I slept with the light on, and felt like a 6-year-old, telling myself it was only a bird in the house. My neighbor had mice living with him for weeks until he'd called the professionals in. At night, he'd hear them scuttling along and skirting, and one night he'd woken to find mouse droppings on his duvet. Nothing scared the little beasties. But you could lay traps for mice. What could you do with birds? When I called the office, Sue didn't pretend to be concerned about my health, and, well, I didn't have the energy to put on a sick voice. I told her I thought I'd be back in a couple of days, and if my nausea hadn't gone, I would call the doctor out. As if to show how serious I was, or maybe it was the suggestion of medical intervention, I sneezed. Something metallic hit the floor with a ting. Frank took his time to answer his mobile. I scratched my arm as I waited. For a moment, a burst of static hit my ears. Then I heard a click, and then Frank's voice. "Mark, how's it going? Feeling better?" "Worse." And that was the truth. When I first rang in sick, I was 100% fit and healthy and skiving. "Something strange has happened." I told him about the screw I'd blown out of my nose and the blackbirds hiding in the house. I thought he'd hung up, but in the background I could still hear the monotonous drone of a dozen other sales guys. Another click on the line. "If you went on a bender last night, you should have come in and let me laugh at your hangover." Frank's banter sounded forced. "I've not been drinking." "Then maybe you should start." "I'm telling you what happened." What was wrong with him? I was getting the impression I'd angered him somehow. "They're somewhere in the house now," I said. "They're not likely to be hiding under the bed, mate. They'll be sat at a window banging their stupid heads against it, trying to get back outside. If you're ill, you should go to the doctors." "No, I'm not that bad." "You sound it." "And what's he going to do?" "I don't know, give you pills?" "And that will help me catch these birds?" "No, but maybe you need something to help you relax. Get sleeping pills, they'll help." "It's not the lack of sleep that's making me see blackbirds in my house. It's the blackbirds in my house that are letting me see bloody blackbirds in my house." Frank said nothing for a few seconds. I heard a woman's shrill voice in the background. "Sorry, mate. I've got to get back to work." A click, and the line went dead. I first noticed the pins and needles in my arm when I lifted the kettle. Rubbing the arm didn't help. I could feel the warmth from the friction, but beyond that, nothing. Is this what having a stroke was like? No, a heart attack. Weren't you meant to feel stabbing pains in your arm just before your heart stopped? I'd answered my question. This was no heart attack. I felt fine apart from the arm, and that wasn't sending any kind of stabbing pains. It tingled all day. I decided to call the doctors in the morning. The alarm clock went off with an angry buzzing. Automatically, I tried to switch it off, but I couldn't. My left arm was numb. I raised it with my right hand and let go. It flopped against my chest like a lump of meat. Dressing proved difficult. I managed pants and jeans, just about, but the t-shirt was harder with one arm dangling useless. After being awake for 20 minutes, there was no improvement. It was time to call the doctors. But the blackbirds were waiting for me on the kitchen table and turned to face me as I walked across the room. There didn't seem a lot of point in trying to shoo them away. I found the doctor's number and clicked send. There was no ringing tone, though. Just a ticking noise. I ended the call and dropped my mobile on the table. The birds didn't flinch. My head throbbed. Sooty tumbled through the cat flap and bolted past me on her way up the stairs. Thinking she'd been in a fight, I went to the back door to check for any other cats and scare them off if they were there. As I approached the back door, I could hear a noise building in volume. Pink, 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 pink. I opened the door delicately, recognizing the noise, and yet not believing. A blanket of blackbirds covered the back lawn. They turned to face me. Their calls were in unison, and the cacophony was such that I couldn't understand why the neighbors weren't rushing out to see the commotion. As one entity, the birds tilted their heads to one side and regarded me. 1,000 gold-rimmed eyes held me in their gaze. I took a step over the threshold and placed my foot on the patio. Pink, 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 pink. 1,000 pairs of wings ruffled in annoyance. I stepped back inside. I wasn't stupid. If that many birds wanted to hurt me, I wouldn't stand a chance, especially with my useless arm still banging against my body. I stormed past the 2 birds on the kitchen table and went to the front door. Without opening it, I could see the black mass of birds through the glass panels. I returned to the kitchen and stood at the table. "What do you want? Why can't I leave?" My anger meant nothing to them. That made my blood rise even more. "Get out of my house!" I yelled and bent low to shout in their faces. The female took 2 little bounces toward me and cocked her head to the side before turning back to face her companion, her headless companion. Pink, pink, pink. I ran to the pile of dirty dishes by the sink and grabbed a knife. Brandishing it in front of me, I waved it from side to side, swishing it through the air. The birds didn't flinch. "I told you to get out. Leave me alone." Pink. It's impossible to describe how sick I was of that noise. Each utterance set my teeth on edge. I advanced on the birds, twisting the knife in front of me, letting them see what I was holding. But there was still no reaction. With a scream of rage, I launched at the table, holding the knife in my good arm before me like a lance. I aimed for the first bird that had come into the house, good old Headless. It started when he came through that cat flap, and I would end it now. But my arm went rigid, my legs locked, and I stopped in front of the birds, unable to move. The tip of the knife froze in midair, only centimeters from the chest of the blackbird. Try as I might, I couldn't move my arms or my legs. I was stuck still, rooted to the spot, helpless. Pink. My heart was beating so fast I thought my chest would explode. What was happening to me? I wanted to cry out, but the words lodged in my throat. I urged my arm to move, willing it with every fiber of my being. A few centimeters was all I wanted, and I could plunge the blade through that bird's chest and end this. But then my arm started to move, only not in the direction I'd intended. Slowly and deliberately, my arm bent towards me, the knife twisting through the air and catching the light. I wanted to scream, but I knew that if I did, if I lost my concentration for a second, this would be over. My arm didn't stop moving until the knife was at my throat, and I could feel the cold metal touching my skin. The serrated blade nicked flesh, and a thin trickle of blood trickled. This was it then. I readied myself for the final act and wondered how long it would take them to find my body. It was Sooty that saved me. In a blur of fur, she bounded into the kitchen and pounced onto the table, knocking the birds aside in an angry flapping of wings. For a moment, she had one under her paw, but it got lucky and freed itself before taking flight and joining its friend on the top of the fridge. They cried out in alarm, but Sooty just looked at them and hissed. I realized that I could move my arm, and without celebrating, tossed the knife into the sink where it clattered against the rest of the dirty dishes. I wiped the blood from my neck and ran to Sooty, intending to pick her up and make a dash across the lawn. But as I glanced at the blood on my fingers, an idea came. Could it be so simple? My anger drained, and in that moment of clarity, I realized what I should do. But where would it be? I looked at Sooty and realized there was only one place it could be. I pounded up the stairs 2 at a time and darted into the spare room. Sooty followed up after me, flitting in front of me, almost causing me to trip. Her hooded cat bed was tucked into the corner of the room, away from the door. I knelt and peered inside. Sooty brushed alongside me, purring. "Have you been hoarding?" I whispered, sticking my hand inside the miniature tent. If it would be anywhere, it may as well be here, where she stashed her other. My hand touched an object, cold, but soft and round. Good girl. I whispered, and pulled out my prize. The lifeless eyes on the severed blackbird's head stared blankly back at me. Much later, after I'd returned the head to my visitors on the kitchen table, I watched the newly repaired blackbird and his friend bounce along the windowsill and perch for a moment by the open window. They didn't care about me anymore. Whatever had happened to me, whatever they were doing to me, didn't seem permanent or complete. I guess only time would tell. The two birds joined the flock on the ground and were lost as the sea of black rose in a giant wave into the sky with the noise of 1,000 tiny wings clapping. This has been The Ticking Blackbird by Robert Scott-Norton, narrated by Paul Cram. Copyright 2019, Robert Scott-Norton. All rights reserved. Hello there. This is the narrator, Paul Cram. I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for listening and let you know that you can find this story and similar ones in a short story collection called The Haunting of Classroom 6 by Robert Scott-Norton. Probably the easiest way to find more works by Robert are to go to his website, www.robertscottnorton.com. And you'll find a whole world that he's creating there of stories, and obviously there's elements of horror in a lot of the shorts that he's written. There's also an entire series on sci-fi, so take a look at that. As always, you can find me, Paul Cram, online as well at iampaulcram.com. Thanks so much.